So if you don't know what my title means, don't worry, I don't either. So don't worry about that. Don't have a lot of time to chat about that in any event. We have 30 minutes. We could talk for 4 or 5 hours about the topics we have today, so we're just going to get right into it. Bios are in your booklets, so you can check them out right on there. All of the folks on this panel are incredibly sophisticated and knowledgeable about the big changes that are happening in the legal industry. But I'll just do a quick intro. To my immediate right is Cliff Dutton. He is the Senior Vice President and Director of Strategies and E-Discovery at AIG. To his immediate right is Bob Harchut. He's his Vice President Associate General Counsel at GlaxoSmithKline. And then finally, Adam Storch, who is Chief of Staff and Chief Operating Officer for the Legal Public Affairs Division at Marsh McLennan. All three of them are legal operations executives in the nomenclature we use at ACC. We've launched a new section of legal operations because we fundamentally believe that these folks are at ground zero of the changes that are happening in the legal services industry. And we learn so much more from them than we could ever provide back in return. Most importantly, they're the people when we have roundtables, they can get in the weeds and they can be thematic, as mentioned earlier. So they can do both things and they can go effortlessly from both directions. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them during the session. I might have to answer them afterwards because of the limited time. I'm going to start by asking Cliff to just very briefly describe his role, because again, we could be here for hours talking about it. So many interesting things happen. Briefly describe your role, particularly what's distinct about it.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for being here. The legal operations function at AIG spans 4 different functional areas. One is firm management, where we manage the relationship with on the order of 1,200 law firms across 25 panels that operate in 90 countries around the world. So we're operating legal operations not only for AIG's corporate requirements, but also on behalf of our insureds. So that's firm management. The second function in legal operations for us is, surprisingly, because we're so creative, non-law firm management. So firm management, non-law firm management. That's everything from e-discovery to court reporters, including contract attorneys and experts and things like that. Our third functional area is process and information, because underlying all of the operational aspects of what we do, we have to have information systems and data structures, and that group manages that and the analytics associated with it. And the fourth function is strategies, and for us, strategies includes the non-hourly business relationships with law firms, AFAs, and also ADR programs.
Bob?
Okay, so I think ACC now has this legal ops group, and one thing I learned when I went to the inaugural meeting is legal ops at different companies is totally different from company to company. There's no just one model right now. So at GlaxoSmithKline, I head up what's called Global External Legal Relations. So I focus more on the external part of legal operations within our company, and we have a separate group that focuses more on the internal, the budget and strategizing, things like that. But I spent the first 22 years of my career at GSK doing litigation. I was the head litigator. And back in September 2008, we got a new general counsel, came from Sidley Austin, and previously was chief counsel of the FDA. And he asked me to head up this new group to just change the paradigm by which we pay for legal services. So we then entered into a big alternative fee arrangement initiative and some other things we'll talk about later.
And I'm Adam Storch from Marsh McLennan Companies. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and Chief of Staff for that organization, which includes legal, government relations, risk management, communications, and executive services. I've been in the job just short of a year, about 9 months now. Before that, I was 5 years at the Securities and Exchange Commission as the COO and Managing Executive of the Division of Enforcement. I think along the themes that the rest of the panel raised, in some organizations, this is a relatively new and nascent role, but in some organizations, it's quite mature. And I think that bringing together the community of legal operations specialists and in-house counsel and our law firm so that we're starting to speak the same language and trying to align our interests is a very positive development, as the rest of the panel noted. We just had an inaugural conference a couple of months ago in Chicago where there were a couple of hundred legal operations executives and again, all differing levels of maturity and sizes of the organization, but this role and the sophistication and maturity of this role is really becoming front and center for a lot of in-house counsel departments.
Yeah, so unfortunately we can't spend a lot of time on it, but if your firm hasn't spent a lot of time itself thinking about how it engages this function, it needs to do so now. It's going to get left behind if it hasn't. But moving on, we have a number of topics we want to talk about today: managing the outside firm relationship, talking a little bit about metrics. We have other topics that we get to that'd be great. So let's start with managing the outside counsel relationship. Start off with an issue that's near and dear to the hearts of the folks on this panel. It's very important. Hasn't been squarely presented yet today, which is data security. And Adam's going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, some of us just came from the keynote address from Raj Cohen, and he talked about data security being an existential threat to financial services companies, but really just the United States economy in general. And I think that something that we've seen change as it relates to how we manage law firms is that law firms were never looked at as vendors. God forbid you would ever consider them a vendor. And the procurement people were very hands-off, and the type of diligence that we would ordinarily do on some of our traditional vendor relationships, our law firms were kind of put aside and not subject to that type of diligence and scrutiny. I think that the law firms and the requirement for them to have sophisticated, mature, and robust data security controls is becoming more front and center. I think that, to use a common phrase, that an organization's data security is only as strong as its weakest link. The relationship that organizations have with their law firms is as sacred as kind of the one that you have with your doctor. And they kind of know all of your secrets, and you bring them kind of into the mix on quite sensitive matters. And the need for them to have robust security controls is becoming more and more relevant. I think we heard some of the panelists earlier today talk about on-site audits, certifications, reps and warranties. And that's something that we're very focused on at Marsh McLennan Companies, but I think also my co-panelists are also very focused on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Adam points to the need for data security in law firms. It has to be in all of the services that the law firms provide, and that includes their downstream vendors. So when we talk about law firm management and non-law firm management, all of that ecosystem needs to be subject to stringent security requirements. And we have to know where the data will go. We have to control that. We have to make sure that we have appropriate controls on that. So we at AIG participate in a number of financial services industry initiatives to work on making sure that we are giving the right level of guidance to all of our providers, including law firms and non-law firms, so that we can have assurances that that data is being protected in a way that we believe is at the appropriate standard level.
Yeah, and I think it's not just doing a one-time check-in when you onboard the vendor, but figuring out as an organization how we're going to continuously monitor and update those protocols and to ensure that our outside counsel is in compliance with those standards. I think that a lot of the bigger name brand law firms, especially those that work very closely with big financial institutions, have already experienced the pretty invasive audits and questionnaires and surveys. I think that there's a lot of work going on
Comprehensive,
right now.
Adam, not invasive, comprehensive.
I think there's a lot of work going on right now to try to really create a more cohesive view of what those standards should look like, so that our law firms aren't receiving a number of surveys asking kind of similar questions, but different in a different way, in a different format. So I think there's a lot of good work that's going on, but still pretty nascent as far as the maturity of it, as to what firms are looking at.
I know that's fair, And it's also true that it varies according to the size and sophistication and practice area of law firms, including their geography. And when we're working with firms globally, some of whom are representing our insureds in very narrow areas, figuring out what our standards are so that we can have consistency across that wide array of providers is also important.
I just added, yesterday I was on a call with somebody who said that there was a big merger in the news recently, and there was a question whether their non-U.S. servers met the requirements that this company had, and they did not, and there had to be an adjustment to that merger in real time. So this is something that our members, not just the ones that are on the panel, this is why we're starting with this issue. We're leading with it. It is incredibly important to our members. They live in fear of the law firms themselves being hacked and disclosing confidential, sensitive client data. Bob, can we move a little bit? I'll move on to talk about your approach to alternative appropriate fee arrangements. We like to call them appropriate rather than alternative, and particularly in the context of how you guys do reverse auctions.
Okay, so when we got our new general counsel, Dan Troy, he is a firm believer that the hourly rate system just is a disincentive for efficiency. So he basically mandated that every new matter had to be on we call them value-based fee arrangement. And back then, that was 2008, I think 3% of our external spend was on value-based fee arrangements, and now we're up to about 84%. So, we realize some areas around the world, it's not as easy to do these, and for certain matters it's not easy, but we will do them for the most complex litigations, the most complex deals, the most complex investigations. And of course, if matters change, if there's a material change, we'll sit down, have a good faith discussion, and make an adjustment to the fee. But the reverse auction that Amar mentioned grew out of the alternative fee arrangement initiative, where we were trying to come up with a way to make sure that the pricing that we were getting was good competitive pricing. And we spoke with our procurement colleagues who had done reverse auctions in other very sophisticated areas of the company, and they said, why not try it in legal? And so we put together a little pilot program. It's a matter-specific reverse auction where we first send out a template to our internal managing attorneys who customize it for that particular matter. So if it's a litigation, they might attach the complaint, talk about what our objectives are for this litigation. Is this something we want to fight to the hilt, or we might want to settle quickly? And then that gets sent out to the law firms. They put together their responses dealing with the various qualitative criteria that we specified, okay? Who are your attorneys who are going to be on this particular matter? What's their relationship with the opposing counsel? What's their relationship with the judge in that jurisdiction? What's their particular strategy that they would suggest for that litigation? And what's the diversity of their team? It's very important to us to have a diverse team. So they put together those qualitative answers, send them back with their assumptions about the matter, and we take a look with the managing attorney internally to say, okay, are all the assumptions equal? Are the firms on an equal footing when they're going to be going into the electronic reverse auction room? And if they're not, then we issue a set of uniform assumptions, so everybody's bidding with the same information. There's no talking between the inside counsel and the outside counsel to make sure it's a level playing field while this is going on. And then it goes into the electronic reverse auction, which is oftentimes done in a phased approach or by specific tasks. So it's not just one fee, it could be 4 or 5, 6 different sets of fees. And then the managing attorney gets a nice side-by-side comparison of all the qualitative criteria as well as the results of the auction, and makes an holistic analysis of that. And we do not always go with the cheapest, the lowest bidding firm. Oftentimes we will go with a higher priced firm if indeed they had the better qualifications than someone who came in with the low offer. So it's not a bottom feeding expedition by any means. And this can all be done in 4 to 5 business days. So we've had a lot of success with it. We, as a lot of folks have been saying already, we are held to budgets, and our finance people love this because they see it is creating a market-driven competition to make sure that we get the best rates. And we view it as a de facto convergence process because we do qualitative scorecards at the end of the actual engagement itself. When we're doing this reverse auction, they do a scorecard right there, and then they do a scorecard at the end of the matter to see how well they did. And we're gathering all these metrics together to see which firms are in the top quadrant, the best quality and the most competitive price.
So do you do this all on one software platform or multiple?
Just one. It's an off-the-shelf. I forget the vendor. Maybe one of them's here, but it's an off-the-shelf software. Yeah.
That's the term procurement. It's supposed to scare everybody, and I feel GSK took that head on, got procurement expertise within their department and worked through that.
Well,
How do you guys handle that?
Both of these topics, data security and this reverse auction methodology, they both fit into procurement strategies that have been applied to other products and services historically. And there has been a feeling, I believe, in the legal services industry that somehow procurement strategies aren't appropriate or can't work. And the examples we have here show that it can indeed work. We use similar strategies at AIG in a variety of different ways, and not only AFAs are put through reverse auction. So we do AFAs around hourly rates globally. We do reverse auctions around hourly rates globally. We do reverse auctions for those non-law firm services that we acquire, including electronic discovery and other services. So we believe that procurement is not a bad word. Procurement is a set of tools that are used to manage the acquisition of services in a professional way. And when we talk about ourselves as operations experts, that means something. It means operations means something more broadly, and it means that we're instrumenting the system so that we can measure its performance and we can operate to a standard and we can measure whether or not we're getting better. All of that requires data flow so that we can do the analytics to know whether or not we're getting the best outcome at the most compelling value, because that's our goal. It's not to get the lowest cost legal services, it's to get the best outcome at the most compelling value. And as an insurer, because we have understanding of the claims that we administer around the world, we're able to look back and see what the outcome costs are as well as the legal costs and make sure that we're balancing that, and again, working toward the best value using these procurement strategies.
That systems approach. Sometimes I tell my fellow members of my executive team at ACC that we're not really just an association of individual lawyers anymore, in-house lawyers. We're an association of law departments. Law departments have become entities unto themselves, like law firms. And when you talk to, and in that capacity, working with legal operations executives, you were talking about the point about building systems, getting more data. What kinds of data have you looked at, or have we already been looking at? What are you thinking about looking at in terms of measuring outside counsel performance, et cetera?
Right, so I mentioned one of our core functions is our process and information group, and that group has responsibility for all the information technology systems, including matter management and e-billing and analytics platforms, so that we can get the right kind of insights from the data that we do have. So the first thing is you have to make sure you normalize your data and you have confidence in the data, because when anybody starts pulling together data from multiple sources, people will say, well, yeah, but that's not quite right. I don't trust that data. I don't think that's the right way to measure this or that element of the cost. So it takes time. We integrated the claims management of legal services function and the corporate management of legal services about 4 years ago. And during that period of time, we've been constantly working on improving the standard definitions of what the data are so that we can then all agree on the conclusions that we draw from it. So the first thing is making sure you get data that everybody can trust. That's not trivial. But once we have that data, including, for example, e-billing data across UTBMS task codes, we start looking at what does that mean? Are the law firms all universally applying UTBMS task codes to everything they do? Well, no, they're not. So how can we influence that in a way that drives our desired outcome, which is better understanding? Well, that requires us participating as partners with the law firms and telling them what we expect of their behavior. So as consumers, in this procurement model, we have an obligation to communicate what it is that we expect of all of our providers of services so that we can have a better platform of information that we can draw conclusions from.
Have you seen it the same way at GSK in terms of your use of data?
Yeah, so we now have a director of alternative fee analytics who takes all the data that we get from these reverse auctions and by task puts them into the database. So now we have a pretty good idea what what a treating physician's deposition should cost in Corpus Christi, Texas. And we're trying to come up with task-based analytics as opposed to UTBMS coding, which we tried to crunch that data and it was garbage. Garbage in, garbage out, because the firms do it all different ways, and it just wasn't workable. So we came up with our own system of analyzing the data.
Adam, what do you think about, when you're thinking about what you've heard so far in terms of in-house departments doing, what is your message to the outside lawyers and they're thinking about data and metrics as well?
Well, I think that something that that my co-panelists have talked about is analyzing internal data. I think the next phase that a lot of organizations are focused on right now is benchmarking with other organizations and better understanding the global view of legal spend by law firm, by different types of expertise, whether it's at a partner level in the employment and benefits space or an M&A partner, by location, by complexity of work, and the quality and comprehensiveness of the external benchmarking data that we could compile and digest and analyze along with our internal data allows us to be a much more informed and empowered negotiator and buyer of services. I think that all of this data allows us to, as Cliff said, operationalize decision making in a way that probably a few years ago we really wouldn't consider doing. You can imagine as you get all of this data, you could take decisions as to which law firm I'm going to hire when I'm in a certain geography, working on a certain matter of a certain complexity or risk, and give our in-house counsel a list of pre-selected vendors that are the right outside counsel for that matter. Not necessarily the best outside counsel at the highest price, but the right outside counsel for the specific complexity and risk tolerance associated with that matter. I think that's kind of the next generation where more sophisticated legal departments are going, and the massive amounts of data that we've been digesting and collecting over the years. We're now figuring out more proactive and advanced ways to look at them and leverage that data.
Better data gives us a better picture. I was stunned, as many of you may have been, by the photographs that we saw from Pluto today. Well, how is it that we can have pictures of Pluto when I was growing up we thought it was a planet, and it wasn't a planet, now it's something else, and we didn't really know what Pluto looked like until we got data about that. And to see everybody at the same time around the world see this image emerge is stunning. And better data gives us better pictures. So as we continue to collect richer data from this whole ecosystem of legal spend, we will get better pictures. We don't know exactly what they're going to look like yet. They're going to be stunning in their own way. But we'll continue to collect that data and make a better picture so that we can make better decisions and achieve the best outcomes.
And the fascinating thing about that, some people are able to see what Pluto looks like. It's asymmetric, right? I mean, you're hearing folks who are on this panel and talk about how they're mining their own data. I presume, and we know that many law firms are mining their data as well, but it's not always shared. What would your take be? I mean, do you demand your outside law firms share their historical data with you when you're negotiating fee arrangements and other issues with them?
Well, I don't think demand is a nice word.
Right.
We have historic data for the firms that we use. All right, we know what the outcomes are, and we use the data that we have based on our relationship with them. When we have new firms that are responding to RFIs, we ask fairly detailed questions about their experience and their expectations. Absolutely.
I presume it's likewise.
I think for the future, there has to be better interaction between the firms and the people like us who are doing these kinds of things. As Adam said, there's going to be, I think, a movement towards benchmarking the data to get better predictability and more comprehensive data. And I think it's got to be a partnership with the firms. I mean, it's inside and outside counsel need to get together on this.
And we certainly are well aware of many law firms hiring pricing directors, and we've been speaking with the so-called P3 group to create more collaborations with the kinds of folks that are on this panel, so we can continue with that. I'm a little afraid to go into a totally new topic with only 5 minutes left, but I know this is a topic near and dear to all of your hearts, which is disaggregation and unbundling that's going on in the legal services industry. And we're going to start with Adam, of how you approach how you approach the unbundling space when you think about law firms, third-party providers, the make-buy decision, insourcing, et cetera.
I mean, I think disaggregation and unbundling, it doesn't only impact our relationships and the work that goes or doesn't go to our law firms. It also significantly influences workforce decisions as well. And I think a metric that I heard a lot of the general counsels refer to this morning, and I think a lot of people see this as a very positive thing, when your internal spend is higher than your external spend, meaning you're internalizing more stuff than you're sending out to your law firms. I have a slightly different view on that when you look at external spend as lower cost legal process outsourcing type firms that may have a core competency that they might be able to do some of the legal work that you're doing internally or that you're sending to some of your law firms at a cheaper rate. The simple way to do it is labor arbitrage by sending it to a lower cost center. What I really look for in an LPO or a BPO is not just trying to kind of put the work in Utah or in India or the Philippines, but what type of technology and best practices are they bringing to the table that really acts as a leverage point to say, not only can we do this with cheaper resources because of the location of those resources, but we can do it cheaper because we've built a core competency in reviewing these types of contracts or doing this type of document review. And that kind of work, it challenges the model of an attorney making a few $100,000 an hour doing work that could be or should be done by an administrative or paralegal resource. Kind of really unbundling the work is, I think, a significant disruptor. And then you need to have the technology and processes and sophistication not to just unbundle it, but to put it back together again and not lose the big picture. And we expect that from our external law firms too.
Right, with the appropriate level of supervision, right? Because somebody has to be responsible. In addition to labor arbitrage, there's technology arbitrage. We want to make sure that the right solutions are being used to solve the right problem. And sometimes people are the right solution, sometimes technology is the right solution analytically, and we need to understand how we're applying the right level of resource to the tasks that we have. And so part of that is understanding what tasks you have. You have to be really clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve. And if you have a task that can benefit from some of that labor arbitrage regionally, or even more significantly, there are tasks that need to be done to support a legal outcome that are not legal tasks, and those can be done by legal professionals who are not attorneys. That's another way to look at more efficient cost structures to solve the problem that you have. Now, not all problems can be solved in any one particular way. So our goal is to give the right solutions and tools to the people who are making legal decisions, whether that's one of our claims professionals working on a particular matter that we insure, whether it's one of our inside counsel working on a corporate matter. We want to make sure they have the tools to select a most efficient solution for them. We need to provide those in ways that they understand, so we have to have education around that. And one of the things that I think we all have, and all of you in this room share, is an obligation to educate people about these efficiencies. It doesn't come out automatically. We have to be teachers. And so I would enlist you all in that teaching mission.
I only got a minute and a half left, so I'm going to just quickly wrap this up. Maybe Adam, actually I'll give it to Bob because he's the last person not to have spoken. If you had one takeaway for the folks in the room that you really want them to focus on as they walk out of here, out of this panel, what would that be?
I think it was echoing here. The word is efficiency. Be efficient and provide good quality, because again, it's not just the lowest cost, it's efficiency, quality, and outcomes. Who brings the best value?
Adam?
I think that the language that we speak in-house in the operations groups, and to the extent that our outside counsel can kind of understand our language, understand our goals and objectives, and better coordinate in sharing data with us, I think we'd continue to advance the ball.
Cliff?
I think improving the quality of the data that we all have so that we can make good decisions is our collective goal.
Our prep calls lasted longer than this panel, so thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation. If there are any questions, happy to answer. Wonderful.
To know, I think Bob, you mentioned the changes that have happened or are triggered by the new general counsel. And I was wondering if you could share the changes that are triggered by the general counsel, is it the CFO? Where did that sort of decision sort of continue?
Leadership from the General Counsel's office is critically important to making progress, absolutely. And the understanding that the General Counsel has, not only at AIG, but I think more broadly, that they are part of a business decision-making process is a trend that is taking hold. But leadership from the General Counsel is essential.
Presume the same.
I agree, and I think that our General Counsel sees us as being responsible for running an efficient organization, and these tools and techniques that we're talking about today allow us to do that.
Anyone else? Wonderful. Please join me in thanking the panelists today.
Thank you.